Fill her up.
You're listening to the Gas Digital Network.
We need to roll back the state. We spy on all of our own citizens. Our prisons are flooded with nonviolent drug offenders. If you want to know who America's next enemy is, look at who we're funding right now. Every single one of these problems are a result of government being way too big.
You're listening to Part of the Problem on the Gas Digital Network. Here's your host, Dave Smith.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of Part of the Problem. I am Dave Smith. He is Robbie the Fire Bernstein. Hello, good sir. How's your afternoon treating you?
Hi, Davey Smith.
What's new, buddy?
Nothing. We did a show 2 days ago. I've been home since, so zero. Nothing. I have laundry that's done, so that's kind of nice before Vegas. I have clean clothes and underwear.
Come see Rob in Vegas. Clean trousers and briefs the whole time we're out there. That's right. We are leaving in just a couple days here to go out to Las Vegas, June 14th and 15th. Wise Guys Comedy Club out there, 4 stand-up shows with me and Rob. Come check us out. Then I'll be over at the Comedy Mothership. We got dates in Nashville, Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Kansas City. Also, I'll be in Orlando in August, early August, speaking for the Young Americans for Liberty at the Revolution yearly event there. So looking forward to doing that. Haven't been there in a couple years. Looking forward to going back. ComicDaveSmith.com for all those dates. And of course, it's almost summer, which means it's porch season.
Get your porches ready. We're porching.
And where can people go if they'd like to?
Porchstore.com, Run Your Mouth Podcast.
There you go. All right. So breaking news just before we sat down to record here is that Hunter Biden has been found guilty of all 3 charges, all gun charges, and he is evidently facing up to 25 years in prison, although he is a first-time offender, so it's very unlikely that he will get 25 years in prison. I don't know enough about these specific charges and what the standard is for how a first-time violator is typically treated, but I would think if you're looking at 25 years at the maximum, the idea of getting a few years in prison is not off the table. I don't know. What do you think, Rob?
I think he was certainly guilty of this crime, but it's the lamest thing to catch him or have him go down for. And I think most Americans, maybe hard drugs, but I don't remember that the Second Amendment was contingent on your sobriety, and specifically not just your sobriety. Like, I guess you can be hammered every day, all day of your life and own a gun, but if you're smoking the marijuana or partaking in other drugs, then suddenly it's illegal. And I don't think that's the way that, it was intended. I bet the founding fathers were hammered all the time.
Yeah, that'd be my guess. Certainly that Benjamin Franklin character, I'm pretty sure it was. It is a bit of a weird dynamic for a lot of different reasons. But it does, seeing the right half of America kind of celebrate gun control laws is a bit odd.
Now, I think
good.
There's something to be said for it almost becomes what's more corrupt in this case. If you have a law on the books and someone clearly violated that law and you let them off the hook because of their status, is that more corrupt, or is getting this guy on this law? And so in this case, you can make the argument that was caught so red-handed, probably got favorable treatment initially when when the cops were called and they had to relocate the gun that had been thrown out in the garbage. And so then as the story later reemerged, it was pretty clear that he wasn't sober at the time, and that and that there was some sort of a cover-up. So, I guess in this case, it makes sense for him to have been prosecuted. But like I said initially, let's actually get them on the financial crimes. Let's get them on something that actually matters and changes the country. The fact that the crack addict had a gun and has to go to jail for that, it's just not that important.
Yeah, no, look, I agree with that. And it's, let's also not forget, I believe that it was the prosecutor who offered him a real sweetheart deal, and the judge ultimately said no. It came down to one guy who was just like, no, we're not giving you a sweetheart deal just because you're the president's kid.
It goes beyond sweetheart deal. From what I recall, it was unprecedented in that it got him off the hook for unrelated crimes. It was basically like a blanket immunity, which the judge looked at and said, we can't do that. And then that forced them to go back to the drawing board because I believe the judge basically called them out for the prosecutors being the cover-up, and that he was getting a sweetheart deal that included immunity for all crimes, which just basically meant they couldn't look at the Biden financial situation and that the entire thing was going away. And the judge was like, yeah, that's not the way these deals work. And then it led to this court case first, which I don't know what that then meant. He won't be prosecuted for the other court cases that we might not see.
So there is a weird thing that you were getting at before where you feel like, I think a lot of people look at this and they go, first off, the guy was so blatantly corrupt. And even if it's not technically illegal, the fact that he was raking in millions of dollars off influence peddling, you're like, oh, that stinks so much that it's kind of like, oh, whatever they get him on, whatever, he deserves to be gotten for whatever it is. There's also the kind of looming questions with Hunter Biden about what exactly was he doing to chicks? How old were they? You know what I mean? Like there's just a lot of like looming questions there. This guy very clearly comes from a very dark place and seems to be a guy who's done a lot of very dark things. That being said, it is still a crazy reminder, to your point, that there could be restrictions put on your right, like one of your most basic rights, the right to have a tool by which you can defend yourself. And that, to your point, I can't help. This is the problem when you have principles. They can be inconvenient at times, but you're just like, I don't know, dude, this is crazy. Like if you could go to say to somebody that if you, like you said, if you drink, then you can't own a weapon. You're like, oh, but then essentially you've just violated somebody's right to own a weapon, because they also have a right to have a beer if they want to. And that principle doesn't really go away with other drugs. It's a little bit different if you're talking about someone being like very reckless with a gun, leaving a loaded gun around children or something like that. But to just be in trouble because like drug addicts aren't supposed to own guns. Look, man, you either believe in the Second Amendment or you don't. And so that's, I do think in a way, nothing to celebrate. Although you raise a fair point when you say they would not hesitate to throw any normal Joe in jail for this. So why should he get different treatment than them? I suppose is also a fair point.
I don't think this is typically a crime that they're looking to prosecute. So, for example, if you've said that you're not a drug user and you own a gun, I don't think the cops are knocking on your door all that frequently to find out if you're actually smoking marijuana.
Right.
Or I'll go one step further. I don't think they pull the registries all that often on who's a medical marijuana user who also has a gun permit to see if because you're not, on paper, you're not allowed to have those two things at the same time. If you're filing for a gun license, from what I understand, if you're a medical marijuana user, there's not an exemption, and they make.
Is that true? Really?
Yeah, I mean, maybe Brian can find exactly what the form is. Maybe I should have looked it up of what it is that you're swearing by, but I think it includes marijuana usage. So I don't know of any cases that Yeah, I mean, that would be an easy one. If you wanted to just pad your books and prosecute some crimes, you could pull the medical marijuana list, cross-reference it against gun permits, show up to people's homes, see if they're currently using marijuana, see if they still have their licensed firearm. And you could run that playbook all day. It's like a DUI traffic point. You could start making some serious money prosecuting these people and putting them in jail. So I don't think, like I said, I don't think that they typically look to prosecute this. However, in the Hunter Biden case, I think if you have a drug addiction problem to the point that the cops are being called to retrieve a gun and you got a panicked individual over the crack being in a car or the current condition of your spouse, I think that's usually when they start sniffing around. And unless you're in the political elite, they don't just help you clean up the mess and brush it aside.
Yes, I think that's probably a reasonable assumption that they're not just doing that for a regular guy just to be nice about it. It is, by the way, the whole, and I just find it all to be so incredibly corrupt, but the whole system of like laws being enforced when they choose to enforce them, plea deals being worked out, I just find the whole thing to be so incredibly corrupt. That they always just go over to a prosecutor and they'll be like, okay, you got him for this felony and these 3 misdemeanors. Can we knock that felony down to a misdemeanor? And depending on the whims of the prosecutor, they might go, okay, we'll knock it down to this. Or, okay, if you plead to this, then we won't take it to trial over this. And they constantly use this system where, and this is the way it actually works. And if you're lucky enough to have never gone through this or know someone who's gone through it, good for you. But if you have, you know how brutal it can be to deal with the court system. But it'll be a thing where like they'll have you on a charge, like a gun charge or a drug charge or something like that, where you are looking at 25 years if you go to court. And then they'll be like, okay, so just plea down to like 2 years and then 5 years parole. And you're basically in the situation where you'd have to, if you don't have money particularly, you'd have to go into a trial of something that you are technically guilty of in a lot of cases, not all, but in a lot of cases they're like, I did have a gun, I did use drugs, you didn't do anything to anyone, but you are guilty of that. And so you're going to have to, like, if you don't have money, you're going to have to go into a trial with a public defendant where you might lose and be looking at 25 years in jail. Like, your life is ruined. And so you're basically in a position where you have to take whatever deal they offer you. So the whole system is just so corrupt. Obviously, in this case, it was corrupt in the sense that they tried to give him this sweetheart deal. That didn't work. That being said, I'm sure there's a lot of evil shit that Hunter Biden's done. I'm sure there's a lot of evil shit that Joe Biden's done with him. It does feel like this is all bullshit. We're never going to get to the bottom of any of that. And instead, what you're left to celebrate is the fact that a crime that should never put a human being in a cage for 25 years might potentially do that. And not that I think Hunter's going away for 25 years. I'd bet a lot of money that that's not going to be the case. But it's just like, I don't know, dude. Maybe this is what brings me back to my libertarian roots. But if you were to ever, like, just on paper, if you think about what the punishment of stealing somebody's life, it's very debatable whether killing someone is worse than locking someone up for 25 years. Yeah, it's 25 years. Like, what crime would you have to commit that would justify you going away for 25 years? And I don't know, in my mind, I would think like murder, you killed somebody, you tortured somebody, kidnapped a child. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you just stabbed someone and they lived and you were like, you're going away for 25 years, you'd be like, ooh, that's a long time. You know what I mean? Like, but maybe if you stab someone, you deserve 25 years. But the idea that you would ever even be talking about a sentence like 25 years when there's a victimless, nonviolent crime is, I mean, I can't overstate how horrific just morally that is. And it is one of these things that most people who are middle class and above, and even people who aren't necessarily middle class, but just aren't kind of in that world, it's a thing that's almost easy to pretend doesn't happen in our society, that this isn't a thing. And then, like, when someone like Hunter Biden comes up, we talk about it. But just to think that how many regular people are there who have just you know what I mean? Like, gotten on the wrong side of one of these laws where now you're looking at 25 years. It's just insane. And then, of course, the real hard criminals we let out on the streets. Go ahead. What'd you say? I'm sorry.
I just said legalize drug driving.
There you go.
After 3 a.m. 3 to 5 a.m.
That's not a bad idea.
Yeah, it's a nice compromise.
That everybody else knows, listen, you get off the road. This is drunk driving time. What were you doing out there at this time? And then if you're at the bar and you're way too hammered to drink, it's like, just push through, keep drinking. make it to 3 a.m. If the bar closes at 2, you got to stand outside in the cold for an hour, maybe go hit a drive-through, and then, you're on your way. Now we're talking solutions, Rob. Now we're starting to move in the right direction. Anyway, I don't know. Do you care to offer a prediction? What do you think's going to end up happening with Hunter Biden?
Joe loses the election and pardons him before he goes to jail.
It's not a terrible prediction.
Joe has said that he will not be pardoning him, but I call bullshit on that.
I think if he loses the election and he's only got a few months, I don't know. What would weigh heavier on your mind, a promise or saving your son's life? By the way, are these federal charges? Can he pardon him? Yeah, it is. They're federal charges. So he can be pardoned. He can be pardoned by the president. So we'll see. That'll be an interesting one as well.
Or he goes to the nicest jail in the country and they give him all the paintings that he ever wants to do, and he's not there all that long.
Yeah. It's that my guess would be yes, something like that is going to happen. I do not think that you're going to see Hunter Biden in a maximum security prison for any extended period of time. But I don't know what exactly goes into these decisions, but it seems like he was just, first of all, he caught a judge who wasn't going to go along with the sweetheart plea deal. And then I think that it was just, there was probably a feeling that this was just too blatant to be able to not, like have something happen to him on. But as as you point out, there's several layers of corruption in this system. So even getting to this point, I still have a feeling we're going to end up seeing him either get no jail time, very little jail time in a very cushy, situation, something like that. I don't think there's anything to celebrate on any level of this. I don't think there's anything to celebrate with these laws existing to begin with them being enforced on anyone. And I don't think that there will be a real punishment for anything that he's done. And by the way, it also should be mentioned, aside from the stuff with, like, let's say, verifying the ages of some of the people involved in, some of the photographs that have leaked from his laptop and stuff like that. I'm not saying I'm not claiming to know the extent of how evil what Hunter Biden's done is. But in the broader, bigger world, the real villain isn't Hunter Biden, it's Joe Biden. And he's the career crook. He's the career corrupt politician who was the credit card company's man in Delaware, who championed, the harshest drug and gun laws in the country, who's, been a absolute catastrophic nightmare on both domestic and foreign policy as vice president, as president, as a senator. I mean, he's the real bad guy. And so just like his son getting a conviction for a gun charge, it's kind of a sad state when the people who hate Joe Biden take that as a victory, if that makes sense. I mean, we should get better, but we quite possibly won't. We'll see. All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is My Patriot Supply. We all know that the future is uncertain. That has been made more and more clear over the last few years. If you don't know what the future might hold, but you don't want to panic and you want to go into an uncertain future prepared, check out My Patriot Supply and learn about the Grid Doctor 300. Since 2008, My Patriot Supply has helped more than 3 million families prepare for emergencies and power outages. Those are emergencies. Our failing power grid means more of them are coming. Protect your family with reliable power. Get the Grid Doctor 300 right now at preparewithsmith.com. This solar power generator lasts longer and runs stronger than others. Connect 2 solar panels at once and harness up to 200 watts of charging power from the sun. It charges fast too. Use it while it charges. Multiple ports mean no devices left behind. You can run phones, fans, even a mini refrigerator. Take $50 off your Grid Doctor 300 at preparewithsmith.com plus fast and free shipping. That's preparewithsmith.com. All right, let's get back into the show. All right, so there has been some pretty big news on with both of the proxy wars that America is currently involved in for absolutely no reason. I don't know. You want to do? Let's do Russia first, and then we could talk a little bit about the situation with Israel and Gaza. All right. So, what's your understanding of the developments over the last week or so here, Rob? It was essentially the Zelensky government came out talking about launching attacks inside of Russia. This seemed to get kind of a wink and nod agreement from America that this was okay. Some political leaders like Lindsey Graham going far enough to say that absolutely it's okay. This then led to Vladimir Putin responding by sending some ships to Cuba. The Cuban government swears up and down that there's no nukes or anything like that on the ships. It's clearly a power move by Vladimir Putin, letting us know that he has other options that could make us feel as uncomfortable as our military hardware on Russia's border makes him feel. What do you think about all this?
I think it's a dumb escalation. This war was lost in week one when China and India didn't get our back and continued to buy Russian oil. And we've just kept pushing forward with stupidity that has led to the deaths of countless Ukrainian people and exposed the U.S. for being, I wouldn't necessarily not say a superpower. I would just say not in line with the hubris of the United States government of our ability to just bully the largest nuclear powers in the world, and that everyone will just get in line with an ever-expanding U.S. Imperialist strategy. So this war has been a failure. The sooner that we finally admit we lied to you and we cost countless Ukrainian lives, the sooner that this can be over, and not in the most horrible of terms. It basically means Putin's going to keep the territories that he's seized with this war, and we can call it a day. And instead of admitting defeat, we're pushing forward, and we're not just pushing forward, but we're escalating. And now we're saying that you can use our devices within Russia's borders. You had Biden made mixed statements saying that no, it's only in the territories that Russia's conquered. That's not true. I would venture to guess that's not true. You've got Biden giving checks over and saying, sorry, I held up this money for as long as I did. This is all just very stupid and an unnecessary escalation, and what's already gone on too long and been a stupid dance from the start.
Yeah, that's right. I remember, I think I've told this story before on the show, but I remember there was one time with a guy, there was after a Fox News show. I want to say this was in 2015, if I had to guess the year. And the guy was telling me, so he was a Green Beret, and he had done a couple tours in Afghanistan. And a bunch of us from the show went out to grab beers at a bar next door after, and we were all just like having some beers and talking. And he was telling me, now this was in 2015, but he was telling me about, I think, 2008, which had been his most recent tour over in Afghanistan. And he was a Republican, and had been a Bush supporter, but he said that he saw George W. Bush telling the American people about how strong the army that we were building over there was and what a capable military force they were. And he was like, dude, the president is just lying through his teeth to the American people. And he started telling me all these stories. And like, I already knew that was bullshit, but it was interesting to hear these kind of like firsthand stories. And he was talking about how he's like, dude, the people who they say were training this army, they're illiterate goat herders. Like they're just people we grabbed and we give them a gun and we do a little bit of basic training and we tell them they're part of the military. He goes, and then we leave and we come back to that village 2 weeks later. And he used that gun to rob everybody else in the village and take some stuff for himself. And the idea that we've created some type of like fighting force here is just a total lie. And you could understand where George W. Bush was in the year 2008. This is his final year in office. The war in Iraq's already been a disaster. His economy has been a disaster. What's he going to say now? That also, by the way, the war in Afghanistan is a disaster, and this is going to take us 20 years just to fail, and we're just fighting this catastrophic war for no reason. So, of course, all of the incentives were for him to lie and say, no, we're building up a great army, and we've defeated the Taliban and all of this stuff. But in hindsight, you look at that and you're like, oh man, that lie kept the war going for another 13 years or 12 years. You know what I mean? Like, it's like if you had just been honest at the time, we could have gone, yeah, okay, listen, we can't build up a military here. We can't nation build in Afghanistan. It just doesn't work. And the Taliban's going to take back as soon as we leave anyway. So we might as well just leave now. And if you had done that, you would have saved 12 years of bloodshed, you know, with some of the highest casualty numbers coming well after that. And then, of course, Obama has a big surge in Afghanistan. Then Trump had a little surge in Afghanistan when he came in. And what does it all end in? Us leaving, the army falling apart, and the Taliban taking over. Exactly what my Green Beret friend there told me he knew back in 2008. And he told me in 2015, but he said that he had known it since 2008. And so anyway, the reason I bring this up is just because of the point you're making about, like, if we could just be honest here, you could just admit that, like, oh, we were wrong. This didn't work. And forget even the policies before Putin invaded in 2022. But, you know, since then, yeah, the sanctions didn't work. We didn't foresee it going this way. We didn't foresee the fact that we wouldn't be able to manufacture ammunitions at the same rate as the Russians and that whatever, you know. But instead, they lie to keep the thing going. And that's just the worst. It's the worst thing you can do during a war that's doomed for failure, to lie to yourself to keep it going so that people keep dying, and then you ultimately fail anyway.
I almost see it as, it's like if you're a boxing trainer and your fighter's getting the shit kicked out of him, and instead of throwing in the towel every time he gets knocked down, you go into the ring and you pick him back up and you're like, no, you got this. Yeah. You're not and then, of course, our governments go, oh, or we got to help this guy. He's got a fight to win. We got to pick him back up to his feet. What, are you just going to leave this man while he's down as he's losing a fight? And it's like, no, we're going to call it what it is and move forward, because he can actually fight another day, or at least have half a brain or half its young adult men still alive.
Right. Well, you know, there was a point late last year, earlier this year, where it seemed like there was a move to back away from the war in Ukraine, and that there were more and more Republicans kind of saying, we don't want to fund them anymore. The current Speaker of the House, before he was Speaker, was saying that. Somehow
they flipped Mike Johnson, and that was the end of that.
Yeah, that's right. But it seemed, you know, when Time magazine put out that piece about how the war was over and Zelensky had lost the confidence of his own military, they were no longer following his orders. This was a major problem that they had, that they couldn't conscript enough men to go fight. And then when they did, they simply wouldn't go. You know, they'd be like, take an offensive against them. And they're like, no, we're just going to get slaughtered. We're not doing that. And then it seemed pretty obvious that the writing was on the wall, that no one could really deny anymore that they had lost, and that this was perhaps coming to an end, or at least the U.S. backing of the war was coming to an end, which would bring the war to an end. Since getting Mike Johnson to flip on this, and now going into, earlier this year, going into an election year, it seemed that the calculation was made that they needed to get one more aid package in. But I think most of us took this as, okay, you know what I mean? Like, this is Joe Biden attempting to not have the musical chairs run out before he gets reelected. You know what I mean? Like, to not have the music stop before he's over the finish line, and then we'll deal with this problem next year or whatever. But I do have to say that over the last, the greatest danger to me I saw in this war was at the very beginning of it, when it looked like, Ukraine was more formidable than most people had imagined. Of course, this isn't just out of nowhere. It's because since 2014, NATO has been conducting joint exercises, military exercises with NATO's military, and that they got unlimited backing from all of Western civilization. And the real concern was that, oh my God, I mean, dude, if Ukraine can actually pull this off and win somehow, Then Vladimir Putin takes this humiliating defeat right on his own border. Does he lose his ability to govern at that point? Is he worried that forces within Russia or Ukrainian forces are maybe a threat to his life? And if so, you know, do you push a guy who's got nothing else now except the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons in the world into thinking about using one and how quickly this can escalate? Ever since Russia, it became very clear that Russia was dominating the war and was in no jeopardy of losing. I think that ultimate fear got shelved a little bit. Like, okay, it didn't, the guy's not going to win and then destroy the world. He's, that's what you'd be concerned about if he thinks he's going to die. So fuck it. Why not bring other people with you? But then over this last week, it seems so insane. You can't even imagine it's really happening. But the idea of when this thing is lost, and anybody paying attention knows this thing is lost, to start making these threats of hitting Russia inside of Russia with U.S. weapons, and then to see this kind of escalation of him showing us that he can bring ships over into our hemisphere where it'd be real easy for him to hit us in a matter of minutes. It's just the level of madness here. So, like, why are we even flirting with this? For a conflict that is thousands of miles away, that has nothing to do with the United States of America, has no strategic importance to us whatsoever, and is already lost. But nobody has a plan for how Zelensky is going to get back the Donbass region. There's no plan for that. Crimea? Are you kidding me? What's the plan for how Ukraine is going to take that back? So that's already lost. And we're just now flirting with a nuclear war again for absolutely nothing to help Biden's reelection campaign or something. It's just there's no explanation that makes this make any sense. So
if people haven't watched it, and Tucker Carlson doesn't need double endorsements from us of the Thomas Massey episode in this one, but the episode with the guy from Harvard whose name escapes
Jeffrey Sachs.
Yeah, it's a great 3 hours talking about the stupidity of this war. And as you just said, there's no plan articulated for how this possibly leads to a victory. So why are we going to continue the fight in what could escalate towards a nuclear war? And like, if you just looked at it like a risk versus reward perspective, we're playing a very, very risky game here. And it might be an outside risk, but it's like, why have that risk increasing? Why would you play around with that when you could just get rid of it? It makes, it's just so, it's as dumb as the whole COVID run where you're just like, what are you doing here?
Yeah, no, 100%. The Jeffrey Sachs episode was excellent, by the way. He's great. I'd love to interview him sometime. Very, very interesting guy. And yeah, he really knows his stuff on the history of Russia. He was actually somewhat involved in the early post-Soviet Union Russia. But yeah, there's just, it's absolutely insane. And it is, again, one of these wars, like one of the themes of so many of these wars, pretty much every war America's been involved in my life, one of the themes of them has been that there's no clear end game in sight. That people have thrown out, things of like all Ukrainian territory. I think it was Nancy Pelosi at one point during this who said that taking back Crimea was a part of it too. And you're like, wait, what? But what's the path to how that could possibly happen? There's just no way. There's no conceivable way it could. And it's the same thing with, the war in Iraq and Afghanistan and all of them. It's like, when was there victory in Afghanistan? Like, I don't know. I guess when they embraced feminism, that's when you'd know there was victory or something like that. It was just these always kind of lofty, unachievable goals. And by the way, it's the same with Benjamin Netanyahu in Gaza. Like in fact, he's had a few high-level resignations in the past few weeks over that specific issue. That there's just like, what are we doing here? What's the plan? Just keep it going as long as we can so that people don't have to realize that Netanyahu doctrine culminated in October 7th and that's your legacy, which, by the way, there's no way of getting out of. There's no way of getting out of the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu was the longest serving prime minister in Israeli history. And he was the big, tough right winger whose whole issue was security. and it culminated in October 7th. That is on paper a failure. And as soon as this war ends, that just becomes the discussion. And so he's just going to keep it going until then and float out all these kind of trial balloons of like, maybe we ethnically cleanse the whole place. Maybe everybody has to take their fair share of Gazans in. Or we're fighting until Hamas is completely defeated. Does anyone actually think that can plausibly happen? No, but we'll just set that up as the goal. And then it's not like, look, like I'm pretty hardcore anti-war. I do believe there's such thing as a just war, but or a war that theoretically I could support. But you would have to at least admit that a war is going to be much more effective if you had like, here's the goal. We're taking out these 17 bases. Here's the goal. We're taking out the, you know what I'm saying? Like if there was something tangible, we're going to do that. That will be victory. And then we're coming home. But when you just have these kind of vague, we're going to fight a war on terror. You'll know we've won when there's no more terror. You know what I mean? It's like a war on drugs or a war on cancer. What? So that's just an excuse to fight this war forever because you're never going to win. So that just like, it's really great if you're making profits off the war, but if you're not trying to ruin the world, it's not the best plan. All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is Entera Skincare. What do you get when you combine a biomedical engineer, martial arts, and a distinct frustration with the skincare products currently on the market? Well, the answer is Entera Skincare. Nick Andrews, their founder, is a biomedical engineer by training. He was a former pharmaceutical industry maven and enjoyer of martial arts. He often found his skin worn and in bad shape after contact with the mats and his sparring partners, so he set out on a mission and he created Entera Skincare. Entera's mission is to revolutionize the skincare and hair regrowth industry by offering cutting-edge, scientifically advanced products that deliver real, tangible results. They provide their customers with the most effective solutions for skincare and hair regrowth needs, backed by rigorous research and development. The team at Entera strives to empower individuals to feel confident, beautiful, rejuvenated, embracing their unique skin through their luxurious and innovative products. The Ageless Bundle isn't just about skincare products, it's an investment in skincare transformation. Unleash the potential of your enhanced skin by reducing the signs of aging and radiate timeless beauty like never before. Don't miss out on this incredible opportunity to transform your skincare routine. Use the promo code PROBLEM for 10% off at checkout when you go to EnteraSkincare.com. That's EnteraSkincare.com, promo code PROBLEM for 10% off at checkout. All right, let's get back into the show. Okay, so evidently, as far as some news goes on the Israel-Gaza front, there was some movement being made toward a ceasefire proposal. It now looks like that's being walked back a little bit. So it was passed by the United Nations Security Council. We'll see. They adopted a U.S. drafted ceasefire resolution. The one reason why I think this is kind of interesting is just that the U.S. was taking the lead on this. And it's kind of crazy that America even has to go to the UN to try to get a ceasefire done rather than just being able to go to Israel, whose war we are funding and arming and giving all types of logistical support and intelligence support to. But if we want a ceasefire, we still have to go through all of these channels, and they're seemingly the White House is unable to actually just put pressure on Israel. That to me alone is pretty wild.
Sounds like they don't really care for the ceasefire.
Yeah, that's for sure. But it is
like, hey, can someone put up more hoops for us to jump through so that we can get to this end goal later?
Yeah. So at least we can be seen as trying to do this. Like, it's really a political loser for us. So let's do whatever optics, adjustments we can. But it was, it was reported that in this last raid, I'm sure you saw this, Rob, where they got in central Gaza, they got a few hostages out. That the U.S. there were U.S. drones flying over Gaza, and that there was a bunch of U.S. Intelligence support that kind of aided Israel in this mission. And again, it's worth Americans remembering that this was one of the major reasons for the attacks on 9/11 was our support of Israel and what they do to the Palestinians. And the fact that Israel is dragging its reputation through the mud right now, you know, why we insist on also having our global reputation dragged right along with them makes no sense from what is in America's interest from that perspective. And of course, you know, Israel is, I thought this was an interesting moment in the war. I was just on Piers Morgan the other day talking about this a little bit. If you guys want to go check that out, that's up. It's up online. And I've said this many times throughout the war that I think the only real way that you can get yourself to support Israel in this campaign is if on some fundamental level you just value Israeli life more than Palestinian life. And I certainly understand feeling that way if you're an Israeli. I understand it. If your family was touched by this in some way, I'd get that. I value my family's life more than I value other life. But as an American, if we're trying to soberly assess this, then you would at least have to say, well, that's not going to be acceptable to the Palestinians. That's not going to be acceptable to the broader Arab world, that what your lives just aren't worth as much. And so I've been saying this for a while. I do think it is true, not that they will explicitly say it, but that implicitly everybody supporting Israel has to kind of value Israeli life more than Palestinian life. Otherwise, you could never see this trade-off as acceptable. But it was interesting just kind of watching so many people on the pro-Israel side celebrate this as an obvious victory. And I thought it was a clear demonstration of what I've been saying this whole time, that look, if you, the Gaza Health Ministry is saying, I forget the exact numbers, but it was like over 200 people were killed and like 60 something babies. I think the Israeli government said, admitted 100 people were killed. They didn't give numbers on how many of them were kids or whatever. But either way, no matter what the numbers are, if you save 4 people's lives, but you had to kill dozens of kids in order to do that, the only way you can point to that and say, what a wonderful thing this is if those kids just don't matter as much as those 4 people, right? Like, what other justification can you have that you'd look at this and be like, oh, what a great thing this is? And to everybody, this is just like, it would behoove you to recognize this, that to everybody in the world who doesn't share the view that Israeli lives are just more valuable than Palestinians. And maybe some of them think Palestinians are more valuable. Maybe they just think all human life is precious. But anyone who doesn't buy into the idea that Palestinian life is just expendable is watching you celebrate as far more people were killed than saved. And there's just something so bizarre about that, and how many people on that side don't even seem to recognize this. And then you get things like what the woman on Piers Morgan said to me the other day, or something where she was like, oh, why does everyone just want to blame the Jewish state? They're just assuming like, oh, it must just be that you're secret Jew haters or something like that. And it's like, no, it's anybody who doesn't just view Palestinian life as worthless is going to look at this and just go, oh, this is just another atrocity.
Yeah, from what I've seen, that's just another indefensible action that was taken by the Israeli government.
Yeah, no, I think essentially that's right. And like, if you're coming to it from the perspective that like it's wrong to kill innocent people and that you can't justify that, and if that's the case, then yes, it's just one more act that you can't really defend in a long list of actions that you can't really defend. So I guess I would say, look, the ceasefire being passed by the UN Security Council, that's good. It's better than it not happening. Hopefully, this'll go through. I did see some people arguing also, and I'm not sure about this, but I did see some people arguing also that this was all just like this entire raid was unnecessary and that basically they could have achieved this through a ceasefire to begin with. I will say that the most, which is always the case with hostages, like if someone runs into a bank and takes a bunch of hostages, the first thing that the local police department does is they bring in a guy who is called what? A negotiator. And he sits there and negotiates. Then he sits there and he tries to get on the phone with the guy holding people hostages.
Yeah,
and they say
pizza pies and helicopters yet?
Yeah, well, but that's what they do. They go, okay, what are your demands? Okay,
let's get you some lunch.
Will you at least let the women and children go? Okay, you give us one person, we'll give you this. You sit there and you negotiate. And that's not an endorsement of the tactics or the person who took a bunch of people hostage. And that's not to say that we think it's totally fine that that person, is allowed to do that. But it's an endorsement of your number one priority being that these innocent people get returned safely. And you don't just go in there and say, well, we're just going to run in shooting because unless you support this guy who held people hostage, you want him to remain in power? You want him to remain in power in the bank? Get in there. Start carpet bombing the bank. No, people don't do that because they recognize that the number one priority is to get these innocent people out safely. And it totally just doesn't pass the sniff test that Israel would even claim that that's been their main goal. And the truth is that this raid aside, and whether those people are right or not, that this could have been done without the raid, they've had the most success getting hostages back in this war and historically by negotiating. And that's what should have been happening this whole time if your number one priority was really getting the hostages back. There was an interesting interview with a guy who had been held hostage in Gaza for a while. He was there for over 100 days, I believe. And he said that their biggest fear was the Israeli bombs and that they had a reasonable, they had a reasonable comfort that Hamas wasn't just going to kill them because they were like, it seems like they want us to, they want to hold us as hostages. Not that they wouldn't kill them necessarily, but he said that his biggest fear was the Israeli bombs coming in. And just think about how crazy that is to even try to pretend that your number one goal was getting innocent people out as you're leveling the place. And how many hostages have been killed by the IDF in all of this? There's been several confirmed, but I don't know that anyone knows what the actual answer is on that. It's all just so crazy. And yes, of course, the obvious step here is that you have a ceasefire, you negotiate for the rest of the hostages. That's the obvious first step. And then after that, you stop killing innocent people. But anyway, not holding my breath on that one, but at least the Security Council did pass this ceasefire. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Guys, a common misconception about relationships is that they have to be easy in order to be right. Sometimes the best ones happen when both people put in the work and make them great. Therapy can be a place to work through the challenges you face in all of your relationships, whether with friends, work, your significant other, or anyone. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Visit betterhelp.com/problem to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/problem for 10% off your first month. All right, let's get back into the show. Okay. So what else? I get, Rob, maybe you know a little bit more about this than me, but Steve Bannon is actually going to jail. Is he doing real time?
Well, Peter Navarro is actually, I believe, already in jail, and now Steve Bannon is going to jail. I believe for both of them, it's for not showing up when they were subpoenaed. So I guess it's contempt of Congress. So I mean, you might know the historical precedent better than me of whether or not you actually imprison people for contempt. I know that Hunter Biden has yet to give that testimony that he was supposed to give. He showed up outside of Congress and did his own little press conference about why he refused to do it. I know you've quoted it a million times, but we know of instances of people lying to Congress. I saw it with Fauci. You've quoted the incident with James Clapper quite a few times. But it does seem to me, they did it when they put Manafort in jail. And I think that they're trying to punish the Trump camp as much as possible. And one of Trump's guys is sitting in Rikers right now. The guy who was working as like one of his the CFA or something. That's crazy. Yeah. Rikers Island's that's no cakewalk of a prison. That's not the fancy go play tennis court prison that Hunter Biden might be able to paint at. That's a real deal jail. So it's obvious that they're trying to put as much pressure on Trump as possible to remove his friends. I don't even know what this really accomplishes at this point in the election cycle.
Well, I think this has been a theme. It's been something that's been going on for a long time. Of course, General Flynn, right, had his life ruined, was left broke. Roger Stone, he ultimately got pardoned by Trump, but Roger Stone had his house raided, was perp walked out and thrown in jail. I think one of the effects of this stuff is that when you really ruin people's lives, and even the Roger Stone thing, right? Like he ended up getting pardoned. But if you think about like the FBI raiding your house with your wife there, like, geez, man, it's like that's pretty real stuff. And what happens is when you make examples out of people like this, it takes a lot of like the competent, decent people who maybe would have been interested in working for Trump. It'll take a lot of them and make them not want to do that. I say from, not that I was ever going to consider working for Donald Trump or that was an option on the table. He'd have to change several policies for me to do that. But, let's say if I wanted to, like hypothetically, Donald Trump was really great. He turned into Ron Paul overnight and he was like, Dave, I want you to come here and do this job for me. Look, I'm a young father with 2 young children and a mortgage and responsibilities. And if I'm looking around and seeing how much they've ruined everybody else's life, I might be like, I can't take that risk for my kids. I can't take the risk that their lives are ruined. And so I do think that's a big part of this, is that it's just kind of like, part of it is simply that like you're an enemy of the regime and the regime is going to punish you. That's what the state does to enemies of the state. It punishes them. And part of it is that it sends out a message to everybody else who might be listening. Like, you come at us and we will ruin your life. And to your point, yes, it's just like Clapper blatantly lying to Congress or Fauci blatantly lying to Congress. They don't get in trouble for that. But you know who does? Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen will get in trouble for that. So they can turn him and try to flip him on Donald Trump, which they did. And so that's how this stuff works. It's really slimy and really evil, but they will try to ruin your life for opposing the regime. And that's really Steve Bannon's crime here. And that's what they hate about him. People could say whatever they, they'll be like, oh, he raised money for
a wall scam
and he scammed people out of money or something like that. And you're like, yeah, that's what Washington, D.C. really hates, anybody who scams money out of people, right? That's the issue that's going on here. The whole goddamn business model is run on scamming people out of money, and they do it by the trillions of dollars. That's not their issue. Just the same way the CIA doesn't hate Donald Trump for being racist. That's not their problem. These are people who will incinerate brown babies at night and then go get a full night's sleep without even thinking about it. They hate him for being an enemy of the regime. And this has been a strategy that they've been embarking on for years, of kind of keeping all of the real outsiders who Trump might bring in out, and probably sending a signal to a whole lot of other people that it's like, do you really want to do this? I think about people like, say, Vivek Ramaswamy, somebody who probably is gotta be one of the best people in Trump's orbit. You know what I mean? Like somebody who me or you would really love to see put in the right cabinet position, because he's great on so many important issues. But this is a guy who's worth a lot of money and has a wife and little kids. You know, don't you feel like if you were him, that might put a little thought into a little bit of hesitation into your mind? You really want to go in there? You really want to go in there and try to roll back the deep state, or you just want to go enjoy your nice life with your nice family? I think that's a big part of this game, is getting, you know, that externality out of it. I don't know. Any other thoughts on Bannon?
I guess it's incredible how they understand that throwing people in jail and ruining them can try and keep people from taking those actions in the future, which is why they're so good at protecting themselves, such as Fauci, and there's no serious talk about prosecuting the guy.
Yeah, well, that does seem to be right. Yeah, well, we will see. Let's just say that when these things happen, a general rule of thumb is like, if you're a part of the regime, I have a feeling everything's going to be okay. And if you're against the regime, buckle up, because you might be in a lot of trouble.
We got, might not have to edit this. We got 9 minutes left on the clock. There was a Nancy Pelosi video making the rounds of her on, January 6th, talking about how she's at fault for the incident on Capitol Hill.
Let's find this.
It's an interesting video because I would say it squashes some of the harsher conspiracies that she was involved in orchestrating what took place on that day. But the video would certainly speak to her acknowledging that there was some negligence of there not being enough security. So it doesn't squash that maybe the FBI was looking for that, and maybe behind closed doors they somewhat tricked her into, hey, you don't need more security. But she was certainly sitting in her car day of, shouting and yelling, oh my God, this is our fault, this was negligent, this never should have happened, and it's on us.
Ooh, let's see if we can find that video.
We have responsibility, Terry. We did not have any accountability for what was going on there, and we should have. This is ridiculous. You're going to ask me in the middle of the thing when they've already breached the inaugural stuff that should we call the Capitol Police? I mean, the National Guard? Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
They thought that they had sufficient resources.
That is not a question of how they had been. They don't know. They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more. We have responsibility.
Well, there you go. Nancy Pelosi takes responsibility, and by taking responsibility, she means she said it once in a car and then never mentioned it again and demonized all the Trump supporters for being responsible for it. Yeah, that is a fairly interesting admission. Now, of course, it doesn't really squash anything, because she could just also be lying, you know what I mean? But it is interesting that she'll at least admit, yeah, seems like maybe you should have been prepared for this situation.
Also, I got to tell you, my grandma has since passed, but she was at times when confronted with decisions, she was definitely a nervous Jewish lady. This is my grandma in action of, I can't call the Capitol Police now. I should have called them before. Now I can't do, like, just kind of being frozen from that. Why? Now I'm supposed to call them in the middle of an emergency? I'm supposed to make a decision? I'm not prepared for making decisions in an emergency. I mean, put me in charge, and I should be the one who, in these situations, should make the decision. But I'm incapable. We should have prepared for this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like she's still admits what's going on, being like, how dare you call me now to call the Capitol Police? They should already be. Yeah, well, they're not. So maybe you should go make that call.
Rob, making tough calls under duress isn't something you can expect from the Speaker of the House.
Yeah.
All right, let's wrap up on that. We will catch you guys next time. Come check us out in Vegas this weekend. ComicDaveSmith.com for those ticket links. PorchTour.com for the summer porch tour. Run Your Mouth, Rob's other fantastic podcast. All right, catch you guys next time. Peace.